Okay, so I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this webinar, College Admissions Overview. And my name is Julie Shields-Rutina. I'm the Director of College Planning, Education, and Training at MEFA. And you probably know this, but this is a MEFA Institute webinar. So just as a reminder for all of you school counselors and others who work with students and families, you can visit the MEFA Institute often and look at all of the different lessons that are there for you. And you can also earn professional development points for attending. So we are thrilled to have a terrific speaker today. We have Drew Carter from the College of the Holy Cross, and he's going to cover this topic. And we want you to ask your questions as you go along, but also we'll leave plenty of time at the end to make sure we cover any questions you have. And let me just talk through a couple of logistics. So if you have a question, you should use the Q&A feature that you'll see either at the bottom or the top of your screen. And that way we can just keep track and make sure that we answer them. If you would like closed captioning, you can hit the live transcript button, and that will allow you to see the words that we're speaking across the screen. And as an added feature, you can choose what language you'd like to see those words in. So I share that with you as well, because that feature exists on our student and family webinars as well. And lastly, if you need to leave, just know that we will be sending a copy of the recording to you tomorrow, as well as a copy of the slides. And just a couple of words about MEFA. We have been around for a long time, since 1982, and we're a state authority here in Massachusetts, although we serve the whole country. And we help families plan, save, and pay for college, and have a lot of products like the savings plans, the U Plan and the U Fund, and the Attainable Fund for people with disabilities. We also have low-cost loans. And then everything else we do is provide guidance to colleges, to high school, and to students and families around everything to do with planning, saving, and paying for college. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Drew to talk about the topics on the webinar today.
Hi, friends. Drew Carter from Holy Cross. So happy to be with you here today. Really happy to be working with MEFA today, but most importantly, happy to be working with Julie. And some of the topics we'll talk about today: current trends in higher ed admissions, talking about formulating a college list, certainly the importance and tips for campus visits, the application process, though anytime we use the word process, we are likely to inspire fear in a high school student. So obviously financial aid, MEFA will be our resource there, and then many other free resources that are available for families. So this is just a bit about, some of the trends we're seeing right now. Certainly we're seeing students applying to a greater number of schools. That's made it harder for colleges and universities to get a sense and to predict student behavior when it comes to enrollment. So colleges, some colleges, not all, but some colleges are starting to lean a little bit more heavily on demonstrated interest. Where I'm finding a lot of students right now are very interested in learning about colleges and universities through social media, mostly because they're trying to go work around our marketing efforts. Of course, colleges and universities then are jumping onto social media to try to market at those students. So it's a little game of cat and mouse that's going on. Obviously, cost is a big factor, and the pricing game has become more competitive as schools' sticker price goes up, but as competitive pricing and merit scholarships has become more of a competitive advantage in enrollment. Certainly, the pandemic introduced a lot of ways for students and families to learn about colleges virtually, and most colleges and universities have held on to a lot of those efforts at their virtual recruitment. I think it's probably the best the best development to come out of the pandemic for college admissions. Um, gosh, speaking of great developments, test optional has really taken over nationwide. And I don't think standardized testing has ever played a smaller role nationwide in college admissions than it has over the last few years, which, from my perspective, is a really exciting development. But then we're seeing, applications get flooded to schools that previously students may have thought they didn't have a chance to get into because they required testing. Now we're seeing increases numbers of applications to some of those schools, which makes them more selective, makes it a little bit harder to predict admissions rates from year to year. And so schools are using their wait list a little more actively and building larger wait lists to use the wait list as another method of enrollment. And as a way to sort of fill beds and fill gaps. And more colleges are planning to use their waitlist each year rather than using it as an emergency contingency. Those days are gone, and schools are now using the waitlist to enroll every single year. Okay, this is a great tool that MEFA offers. Certainly a way for families to keep track of all of the variety of different ways in which students have to meet deadlines. It's funny, I've been in a lot of schools over the last 3 weeks and talking to a lot of students about the stress they're feeling when it comes to the college application period of time that they're in right now. And one of the big stress inducers has been keeping track of all the deadlines. The college application manager would be a great tool for families to help them keep track of the deadlines and to stay on task and to make sure that they are meeting the deadlines, not chasing deadlines. And also, I think, reduce some of that stress. And when we introduce an easy tool for organization, whether it's with college application or your kitchen drawers, we help to reduce stress. And I think this would be certainly a great tool and available on the MEFA website. There's certainly plenty of resources available online now for students to research colleges. And more importantly, there's a lot of tools that students can use, not just schools' websites, but a lot of really effective tools, whether it's the MEFA Pathway, College Navigator, College Scoreboard, Big Future. There are so many out there. I think, typically what I advise students is to stick with the larger companies. They are more likely to have more reliable information. There's a lot of information out there, and only some of it is reliable, as even I've seen when researching Holy Cross's presence on the internet. But generally speaking, these are great resources, and staying towards the bigger companies is more likely to get you more reliable information online.
And can I ask a question, Drew?
Sure.
Just at this stage, when a student comes to a counselor and says, I'm interested in art, how does that look? Would the student just go and start using these tools, or is there anything else that you might recommend?
Yeah, I think that's a great start. I think one of the when students come forward with that information, I think that's a great start. I don't think we should be trying to limit our high school students, particularly junior year or maybe the early part of the timeline, even if that's senior year. I don't think we should be limiting them to certain academic areas if they're not offering that information first. I think students feel like they have to know what they're going to study when they go to college because maybe they've heard their friends say that, or because we ask them so often, what do you want to study when you go to college? And there is a small number of students who have a very clear idea, and that idea is not going to change. But there's a larger number, and probably a clear majority, who have some sort of idea, which may change, or have no idea. And very often they're going to fill in an answer to that question, what do you want to study, if we ask them, because they're going to feel an expectation to answer that question. If students don't have a readily available answer, or if they don't offer that information up, I think we should be thinking more about helping them discern what kind of person they are and maybe what kind of person they want to be, rather than narrowing down on a particular field of study that they want to study or that they think they want to study when they eventually get to college.
Thank you. I think that's great advice. Thank you.
So, here are some few things to start with: institution size and location. again, I'm going to encourage everyone not to present these as binary options to students. Do you want to go to a big school or a small school? Certainly, you can only go to one, but some students, in fact, maybe many students, would be happy at either a big school or a small school. And I don't think we need to present these options to students like you would only be happy at one or the other. Intended major, right? And that may not be something specific. It might be more general. Are you more comfortable in the math and sciences, or are you more comfortable in the humanities and writing and reading? Campus culture is something to consider. Sometimes that is related to size. Sometimes it's related to on-campus residency. Study abroad programs, certainly study abroad is available at most colleges these days, but if a student really has set in their mind that that's something they want to pursue, then maybe finding a college where it's more a part of the culture and it's more supported would be a better option for them. Affordability, right? And that's a big conversation. And that certainly what we want to be doing is encouraging our students to see beyond the sticker price, to introduce the idea that not everyone pays that sticker price at every particular college. And affordability might really depend upon the family resources as it relates to financial aid policies and merit scholarship opportunities at each individual college. It is complicated, but I think it is important to introduce to families that it is more complex than just evaluating the sticker price. Okay, I'm going to start with informal visits. I am a big fan of informal visits. I think sometimes we talk about college visits to our high school students in such a way that becomes intimidating. It becomes bigger than it really needs to be, and it has two effects. One, it makes them put off a college visit because they're sort of intimidated by it. Or number two, it makes them nervous when they go for a college visit. So I'm a big believer in the informal visit. I think sometimes you're just on the way home from grandma's house and you're on 495 and you see a sign that says this college, this exit. And you just get off that exit and you drive/walk around that college campus for 15 minutes. Every one of those exposures is helping to build a vocabulary within that student of things they appreciate, of things they identify, of things they don't want in colleges. And I think those informal visits are not only good, but I think they're valuable, and sometimes even more valuable than the formal visits. Formal visits are great to learn about admissions policies and to really hear the sort of the talking points that the school wants to identify. Maybe even more so to meeting students, whether it might be a student tour guide, or students taking part in an open house program or a panel as a part of an information session. Those are valuable as well. But sometimes that can be the second go around to really celebrate the informal visits, especially early in the timeline, and help students get more comfortable visiting college campuses and spending time on college campuses.
Oh, I skipped over. There you
go. Okay. There we go. So there's some tips for college fairs, right? Certainly making sure the student is registered to attend the college fair. It's always great to see who's going to be there ahead of time. So students aren't spending their whole time wandering around, maybe circling 5 to 10 colleges on that list that they want to visit. It definitely helps for students to have an idea. Most college fairs are set up alphabetically, but if it's a larger fair, like a NEACAC or even a NACAC fair, it may not be set up alphabetically. So sometimes navigating the rows to find those colleges can be confusing. Just a little shout out to those schools that may not be under H, they might be under C. University of, sometimes those schools are under U. So advising your students just to be wary of where those colleges might be located. And again, making sure to look for those events, because it is a great one-stop shopping where a student and maybe parents, guardians, or friends can connect with multiple admissions counselors, multiple admissions representatives from a variety of colleges, and even some that they've never heard of before. It's a great opportunity for a wide range of exposure. Okay. There's lots of different approaches to developing a list of which the student may apply to. Lots of different verbiage. I think it's fair to just hope and advise our students to have balance on their list. And that balance can be represented in two ways. It can be represented in the way of admissibility, our more traditional, likely, possible, and reach. Certainly, we can have balance on our list in affordability, and you can assign those labels. I'll just remind everyone, and I always remind students to put the like in likely. Those schools that are on your list, you have to imagine that you would be happy going to those schools, and not just putting schools on your list that you can get into, but putting schools on your list that you have a likely chance of being admitted, and that you like those schools as well, and you could see yourself on those campuses for 4 years. So putting the like and likely is an important step here, and having balance with both admissibility and affordability. Okay, so all of the college application types, right? Regular decision is the sort of the standard. Usually has a deadline in January or early February, with notification usually early in the spring. Early action, incredibly popular these days. Deadlines, gosh, in the South as early as October these days, but more commonly November, December. Those are non-binding. Early decision, most likely November, December. A few Southern schools are in October. Those are binding applications. You can only have one active early decision application at a time. Rolling admissions, those are where decisions are offered on a rolling basis. Good to be early in that timeline. And then finally, open admission. Those are schools that may ask for some information from a student, but it is just to process their acceptance and hopefully enrollment. So lots of different college applications out there, and sometimes where you apply is certainly important, but which application round you're applying in from the student perspective can be just as important as which schools you're applying to.
And can I ask you something about that, Drew? Can you just say a little bit more about that, about which round and why that's so important for students to think about?
Because we have seen, particularly since the pandemic, a wider range of acceptance rates between rounds within the same school. There are some schools who, just to give you an example, some schools, maybe one school I know has an early acceptance rate in the 70s or 80s% and a regular decision acceptance rate in the single digits. And so you can understand, and that the pools are smaller for early and bigger for regular. Your chances of getting in are less based on whether you apply to that college or not, but it's which round you're applying in can really sway your chances of getting in. Some schools might tie merit scholarships to specific rounds, whether it's early action only or early decision only. Other schools are going to have no preference for merit scholarships, and they'll roll out merit scholarships equally in both rounds. But there can be a big gap in admissibility, and even if we're talking merit scholarships, even in affordability. Sometimes families are uncomfortable asking that follow-up question. What's your policy on financial aid and merit scholarships between your different rounds? I think that's it's a suspicious question, but it's a really good one. And also in what's your admissions policies, like what's your acceptance rate? How do your standards change? What's the size of your pool? That really can impact a student's chances, whether they submitted an application within the proper round that suits them best.
Thank you. And we have one follow-up question on that also. When you say the early acceptance rate, does that equal early action or early decision and early decision? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'd say yes to all of them, right? Some schools may have a big difference between early action and regular. There's some schools that only offer early decision, and then there's those handful of schools out there that offer both early action and early decision. Maybe I've read too many listservs and have too many friends, but in the last few years there have been these stories of particular schools out there that are admitting such an incredibly small percentage of their regular decision pool. Famously, one unnamed school in the South admitted fewer than 100 schools, fewer than 100 students in regular decision a few years ago. So if you were in their regular decision pool, you were out of luck that year. So now that's an extreme example, but it is used to illustrate the fact that while some schools have similar acceptance rates and a student might have a similar chances of getting in, early or regular, that is more uncommon than common these days. It is more likely that it's very different, and that's been certainly a big change over the last couple of years.
Thank you.
Gosh, here's some great places to start researching how to apply. Common App is most popular for sure. Coalition application is well received. Some schools still have their own applications, and that's their crazy, wacky choice. It's nice that there's a little bit more competition in this marketplace, but these are great places to start, and every school certainly has this information available on their website, but it is good for students to keep track of, because they can leverage their common materials, whether it's the coalition application or the common application most often. They can leverage those common materials to apply to a variety of schools with less effort, hopefully, than sending an application to every school like I did when I was in high school. So application requirements certainly can vary, and some schools continue to update this year by year, but certainly most commonly, an application form, transcript, standardized test scores, most commonly to be optional these days. Some schools are requiring recommendations, some just from a teacher, some just from a counselor or school representative. Some schools are requiring both. An activity list, which would most likely be a part of the application, especially the common application or the coalition application. Many schools still requiring an essay. And of course, there's a variety of optional forms, or if you're applying to some specific academic program, perhaps required. That could be an interview or an audition or a portfolio. Depends on, especially at some performing arts schools or some undergraduate programs within larger universities might have more specific requirements. Again, all that information would be available on the school's website. Some of the things that we think about in the world of college admissions when evaluating a student's academic readiness is not just the high school they've been attending or high schools that they've attended, the courses they've signed up for and the rigor of those courses as it relates to what courses and course levels have been available to them at their high school. And not just sort of meeting the minimum requirements, but exceeding those and pursuing challenge. In some situations, depending on some academic programs at the college level, they're going to look for specific courses to be accomplished at the high school level, and sometimes grades. Sort of most famously is engineering programs are going to look for specific math courses and possibly specific science courses on the high school student's transcript. And certainly the sliding scale at the Massachusetts public colleges and universities is public information, and the student's able to get some early information about where they might fit on the sliding scale. And I think there's a little bit of science to this from the admission side in evaluating academic readiness, but there's also some art. Art goes beyond the sliding scale. And, students are always looking to be able to anticipate what the likelihood of being admitted is. And, we understand that. And sometimes we're able to give students some information, but certainly not all. And I think what that really depends upon is not just the student's academic readiness, but how they compare against the overall applicant pool and what that means for that college's admissions policies for each year.
That's great. And if I can ask you a question here, because we get this question from high school counselors often, or once in a while. How do admissions folks keep up with the details of how strong a certain school is, and I think there's sometimes worry about schools that have a lot of AP offerings and fewer AP offerings and changing that structure. So how do you keep up with all the high schools in the country around
Yeah,
that?
it's funny. It's the it's the piece of applying to college that I think is hardest for high school students to understand. They just cannot wrap their brain around the idea that we will know their high school. And I've answered that question for high school students so many times, and they believe me when I say it, but they just can't believe that we will know. When we get our information in a variety of different ways. The first is the document called the school profile, which accompanies the transcript. It's all the information that we would want to know about grading structure, courses available, sometimes matriculation profile, requirements, and AP courses available, how students register for certain courses. It's all the questions we would want answers to. Also, though, on the college side, we have our own database of our own information that we've accumulated over the years from past applicants. And every year that goes by, we get more and more information there. Now, this doesn't mean that there aren't questions that come up every single year that we don't understand. And that's why it's imperative upon the admissions reader to follow up, to look online, to find out those answers. If they can't find out, to reach out to the school. And I say to students all the time, like, geez, you think, you can't believe that I would know the difference between the courses offered at Linfield High School versus Wakefield High School. I say, like, I can tell you the difference between the offerings at Beijing number 4 and Beijing National Day School. Like, we have to understand from every high school around the world. And that's why this is a 12-month job. And it's actually one of the best parts is the variety of schools we see around the globe and the challenge of learning the environment in which that student has been studying over their high school experience.
Thank you.
Um, some brief information about standardized testing. Gosh, we've got juniors getting ready for the PSATs right now. I'm from the Midwest where the ACT is very popular. Gosh, everybody in the Midwest takes the ACT and only some take the SAT. Obviously, it is reversed here in the Northeast, where pretty much everybody takes the SAT and only some take the ACT. I think both are valid exams, and I think it's good for students if they're starting in their sophomore or junior year to explore both, maybe take practice tests in both, and find out which of the two meets their strengths and their academic abilities best. And certainly sometimes we will see AP exam scores. There's a strong list out there now of schools that are not requiring standardized testing. I still think it's good for students to research the tests, and I still even encourage students to take the test, but to do so with much less pressure, to put much less pressure on themselves now than students have in the past because of the wide-ranging test optional schools out there.
Can I ask you two questions?
Sure.
Well, one is from one of our counselors who said, do you think with many colleges remaining test optional that colleges will be reporting scores that are higher than in the past because they're attributed only to students who actually send the scores?
Yeah. So we've been test optional at Holy Cross for about 16 years. And for the first 10 years, we did not really see a change because what we saw was there were still a number of students with really high test scores who chose not to submit their scores. They were choosing not to submit their scores because they were coming from high testing communities. And even though their testing would be very competitive in our pool, their testing may not have been competitive in their friend group. And so they didn't think their scores were very high. And then still we have students who would submit their scores even though their scores was below our profile. And that may have been because they were unfamiliar with our test optional policies, or because in their friend group or in their community, their scores were pretty competitive, even though they were below our profile. So you would be surprised to see how many scores are out of profile. And if the school is truly test optional, you consider scores when they're submitted, but they can't be a huge part of your decision-making process. I'm going to contradict myself and say scores are going up. The test keeps getting a little bit easier over time, and we're seeing, especially since the pandemic, a smaller percentage of students submitting their scores than ever before. That's true at a school like mine that was test optional pre-pandemic, during the pandemic now, and post-pandemic. So I think we are seeing slightly higher scores, because, right, it is only the students who are submitting those scores. They're self-selecting, but there's still some low scores in there. It's not The scores aren't as high as you think they would be with such a self-selecting population.
Thank you. And then I don't know if you want to mention that the SAT is going to be digital, or is anything that you could share about that? And I can say that we actually do have a blog post about that people can read as well. But
That's exactly what I was going to say, Julie. I was going to say,
okay,
read MEFA's blog post
great.
about the new SAT.
Perfect. All right, I will go to the next.
Okay, activity list. Here's another really misunderstood part of the college application. We really like to see what students have been involved with in their free time. We don't, in the admissions world, we don't really bring a huge value to that part of the application. We don't think some activities are better than others. We don't think French club is better than lacrosse. We don't think student government is better than a job at CBS. We tend to think something is better than nothing, but the degrees of something are mostly the same. It does help us just get a picture of who that student is, picture of their interests, and maybe who they might be at the college level. I think since the pandemic, we've seen students with a more liberal reporting of their involvement outside the classroom to include family responsibilities and hobbies. And I think that's been another great development since the pandemic. It's really, I think we're seeing a more complete picture of who these applicants are as people than we ever were before the pandemic. The essays, gosh, another area for a lot of stress. In the admissions world, we're trying to get a sense of whether students can write and whether they can write about themselves. And I think sometimes students feel like the essay has to be, I don't know, has to be their moment in the sun where they convince the admissions office that they should be admitted. And the truth is, that's not really the point of the essay. The point of the essay is just for students to prove that they can write and that they can write about themselves. We hope that students will start early. We hope that students will be creative and think about topics that they want to write about, not just topics that they think they should write about. I know that ChatGPT and AI are certainly perhaps playing a larger role in the creation of these essays. I'll just say that in the world of admissions, we've always understood that there are a variety of influences on students' college essays. Now it might be ChatGPT and AI, but before that it was older brothers and parents and best friends and college consultants. So we've always been suspicious, and we've always looked through these through a critical eye and used it to sort of triangulate with information we're gathering from course selection in the humanities, maybe grades in English, and recommendations from writing intensive courses. So it's certainly not the most important part of the application, but it's something worthy of the student's attention, and it's worthy of the student's effort, but it's not worthy of becoming overly stressed about. Here's the Common App essay prompts for this year. When I talk about the prompts to students, I tell them not to look at them. I tell them to spend time brainstorming topics that they want to write about. And if they run into a roadblock, if they run into a writer's block, if they run into a topic block, then they could possibly use these prompts as a little nudge, as a little shove, as perhaps a little bump in the direction of a topic. But I think sometimes students see these prompts and they think this is a test and these are their possible options. And I don't like students to get so wrapped up. When we're reading essays in the college admissions world, we're not really thinking about what prompt they're answering. I see these as more of a tool for the student who's having trouble coming up with the topic. There's a recommendation, right? So certainly students sometimes are sending those from teachers, sometimes from a school counselor, can even be sometimes from an employer or a teacher who's an advisor to a particular club. Sometimes it's from a coach. Sometimes it's just from the neighbor for whom the student has babysat or done chores. Again, I think it's just an opportunity for we in the admissions world to get a more nuanced picture of who the student is, a more high definition picture. And so more important than who wrote the recommendation really is what the recommendation is going to say and how well that person knows the student. Always my best advice to students: pick people who know you well, not necessarily what their job title or role in your life is. Interviews. Some schools are offering interviews. Some schools are not. Those who are, pretty much all of them these days, have either strictly gone virtual or have retained the virtual option for interviews. School I work at, we do in-person interviews, but also virtual interviews as well. It can be confusing for students to know which schools offer interviews and which schools don't. It can also be intimidating for students to sign up for an interview. But when an application has an interview, it feels like it's in 3 dimensions instead of a flat 2D. I said to a group of students the other day, while I was traveling, I said, because I know what I know about college admissions, when my kids apply to college, they will absolutely interview at every school they apply to that offers interviews. And that's not based on who my kids are. That's based on what I know about college admissions. The advice I would give to my kids is probably pretty good advice to follow when it comes to college admissions. When it comes to fixing cars, don't listen to me. But I think students are the 2 big roadblocks is that they don't know if it's really actually going to play a role, and number 2, they're a little nervous about the idea of it. Number 1, it certainly can play a role, especially for the investment of time and effort. It's certainly worthy. And then the second is it's a conversation. It's not a quiz. It's not a contest. Students aren't asked any questions to which they don't already know the answer, because the questions are about them. And not just about them, but the questions are about the things that students talk about every day: their friends and their family, their high school and their hometown, their clubs and their classes, their hopes for college, their dreams for college. And then, at the end, their questions about college. And I think it's a good opportunity for students to turn the tables and to ask questions of that interviewer so that they can discern whether that college is a good match for them. Variety of decisions that can be offered, right? Let's work from the bottom up. Waitlist. Waitlist does not mean that the student may not eventually be admitted. It is a holding pattern, and it can be discouraging to some students, and certainly would be to me. I understand that. But for students who it's not too discouraging, then I generally encourage them to keep an open mind about waitlist. The students denied enrolling at that college won't be an option that year. Deferred means that school is moving that application from one of their early rounds to a later round, most likely regular decision. And if the student has been admitted, then that's very exciting for them. And they might be offered a variety of different acceptances, whether it's to an honors program or whether it's to a different campus or the main campus. And obviously there's the financial package that comes along with that, which may include loans, grants, work study, merit scholarships, a variety of different things that will help that student understand whether or not that college will be the right destination for them. Oh gosh, understanding college affordability. This sounds like a fun slide, and I feel like Julie would do a better job on this slide than I would.
I'm happy to jump in. Yeah, so I guess I will just also mention that that if you're listening and want to learn a lot more about college affordability and the financial aid process, please know that MEFA has a lot of webinars, a lot of lessons on the different financial aid topics, including completing the FAFSA, the CSS profile. So take a look at some other offerings to get a more in-depth view. But a few things that you can help families think about early on are to get some information, collect some information about the cost of attendance at different colleges, but then more importantly, the net price. So that is the price that they are going to end up paying. So, and there are ways that people can estimate that up front. There are net price calculators on college websites that allow families to go in, put some information as they will on a financial aid form, and get a general estimate of what they might be eligible for in financial aid at that college, which would give the family, a little bit of a sense of, okay, this cost of attendance might say $70,000, but when I do this calculator, maybe for us as a family, it will only be $40,000 or something. So, and again, you can't know for sure. The only way you know for sure is when you have those financial aid offers, but that's a way that you can help families do a little research ahead of time. And then it's important to know what financial aid applications are required and when, like Drew talked about the admissions deadlines, financial aid deadlines are equally important. And it's good to understand if colleges award need-based aid, merit-based aid, or both. And need-based aid is based on your financial information, and merit-based aid can be based on a variety of factors, such as academics, number one, sports, other qualities. But basically, if you fall high in the admissions pool at some institutions, then they have merit-based aid that they award. So I understand that a little bit. And also that you can always encourage your students to be looking outside for private scholarships, maybe through your high schools or their parents' employers, or with some of those online scholarship searches. And then I mentioned about net price calculators and what those are. And again, they're not the be all end all. They can vary from school to school as well, but they do provide a little bit of information when you're thinking about creating that balanced list and making sure that you have some colleges on your list that you're sure will be affordable. And then the forms that students will need to use to apply for financial aid are, number one, the FAFSA. All colleges require that form. And what's important to know this year is that the FAFSA is having an overhaul. It's getting an overhaul. And so it's going to be a new, and I'm going to put this in quotes, simplified FAFSA, or better FAFSA, they're telling us. So let's hope it does look good. I've seen some drafts. But all of this transition is causing a timeline change for this year. And so the FAFSA, usually available on October 1st, will not be available until December this year. And then many colleges, or a good number of colleges, also require an additional form called the CSS profile from the College Board. And that is usually colleges that have a lot of their own institutional money to offer to students. And they feel like they need a little more information than is asked for on the FAFSA to be able to make those determinations about awarding that money. So if the college requires that form in addition to the FAFSA, students have to do that as well. And sometimes colleges will have their own institutional financial aid application. So do look at the financial aid page of the different colleges. This is especially true, we're finding, this current year because of the delay with the FAFSA. There are some colleges who don't use the CSS profile, but are creating their own institutional applications so that they can get estimates of financial aid offers out a little bit earlier. And then a couple of other programs that you can alert your students to. One is mass transfer. That's the program here in Massachusetts that allows students to begin at a community college and then transfer to a 4-year Massachusetts public college at a very affordable price. They can really cut costs a lot by choosing a path like that. There are things like guaranteed credit transfer, tuition credits and freezes. So have your family and students check out that website, mass.edu/mass transfer. And another way that some students are able to save on college costs is through the tuition break program. And that's through the New England Board of Higher Education. And that is a program where New England public institutions outside of Massachusetts will have certain programs available that if a student is interested in those specific programs, can sometimes pay Massachusetts in-state tuition, which is a lot less expensive than paying out-of-state tuition, and attend those out-of-state colleges. So that's another great website for your students to look at. And then, Drew, I don't know if you want to go through the timeline here.
Sure. I mean, I think we're seeing more and more students start early in their junior year, sometimes even sophomore year now. But I think, especially during the junior year, it's good for the student to start to research the varieties of types of colleges and universities, to start those introductory conversations, maybe at college fairs with their school counselor, and also maybe some of those informal visits to campuses, to start to think about teachers to identify, to ask for recommendations, get that PSAT out of the way, not out of the way, but give their best effort towards that PSAT, and then to begin to sort of at the very least to marinate on a college essay and maybe topics that they might enjoy writing about. Fall of the senior year, seeing a lot of students who are doing their last test administration right now, securing those letters of recommendation, attending as many MEFA webinars as possible, hearing Julie speak as many times as possible, subscribe. Maybe that would be for the students, for the parents, to subscribe to the MEFA podcast and to get updates that way. I would put that back on junior year so that you can start slow dripping information about searching for colleges, affording college. It's important senior year also to be thinking about application deadlines, getting the FAFSA in on time, applying for those private scholarships. And maybe that's a good project for the fall, is to be researching those private scholarships. And then the spring, the senior year, right, is not only to get those offers, but then to think, what do I do with these now? And how do I afford college? What do these award letters mean? Sometimes it can be really difficult to understand, and using MEFA's websites to help understand those award letters so that the student is in position and a position of power to choose their college by the national deposit deadline, which will this year be May 1st, 2024.
Thank you. And thank you for plugging the podcast. Yes, we have some great guests. Again, I guess I'll just mention about MEFA Pathway is also a free web portal for students who are in those early stages maybe and wanting to explore different career paths, and then colleges that have programs that lead to those career paths. It's engaging, and so any students that might like to try that out, it's easy and free to just set up an account and play around in there and find information about themselves and again, colleges and careers. And here are all the ways that you can connect with MEFA on social media. And in fact, we tell students that we publish a lot of scholarship information. As we learn about a scholarship, we tend to put that out on social media. And you can always connect with MEFA by calling us, by emailing us, and could be a quick question or a longer, more in-depth question, and we're happy to help you with that. So I'm going to just see if there are any questions. So actually we have I guess a question about MEFA speaking with students. I'm going to answer that. I'm going to answer that privately. Any other questions that anyone would like to ask while we're closing up here? Well, Drew, thank you so much. It's always just great to hear your expertise and your thoughts about this whole process that you know so well from the college side. So appreciate it. And I appreciate the questions from all.
Thanks to you, Julie. I will mention, not as a plug, but as a resource. A few weeks ago, a few friends of mine and I from other colleges got together and recorded a webinar. What are colleges looking for in counselor recommendations? And it was three of us, three different colleges. We recorded it. It's posted on the Holy Cross website now. If you go to admissions and we have a counselor page, there's a link right there to the YouTube recording. So you hear from Kate Girton from Dickinson, Ed Ciros from UMass Lowell, and Drew Carter from Holy Cross. Brainstorm about what colleges are looking for in school counselor recommendations. And so that's on YouTube. So I hope you'll check that out if interested. And it was great to be a part of another awesome programming from MEFA.
Thank you, Drew. I'm going to check that out. That's terrific. Thank you. All right, everyone have a great afternoon.